Brethren, welcome back to Master Craftsman Philosophy. We are excited to keep the ball rolling as we explore more and more of morals and dogma. Really glad and excited to jump into the chapter work now. We're heading into section 6 as we dive in. Specifically, going to be going into quiz 1. Again, we're going degree by degree. So this is going to be the 15th degree. We'll have separate sections on the 16th, 17th, 18th. But we're excited to jump in. If you're participating in this group with the Valley of St. Louis Master Craftsman Study Group program, though, make sure you've read the material before we dive through this video. This section, a couple of these are pretty short, but you want to have read that material before you listen to these lectures as we do the overviews. We're excited again to have you as we explore more and more of Albert Pike's seminal work. Let's get going. Let's see what we can explore and find. So again, we're diving into section 6, quiz 1. That's going to be the 15th degree, Knight of the East or the Sword, or Knight of the East of the Sword of the Eagle is where we are going. This section, of course, does include all of the chapter work, but we are, again, focusing on the 15th degree. 15th degree, of course, recounts to us the return of the captives and the rebuilding of the temple, or the starting of the rebuilding. We're introduced to Zerubbabel, who is a prince of Israel. He's going to be the main character of the 15th and 16th degrees. These are some of the oldest degrees we have in the Scottish Rite. These reflect the Second Temple degrees, if you will, or historical degrees. And he is our key guy going between the remains of Jerusalem and then the minor rebuilt city and the court of the monarch in Persia, visiting with them, trying to get further progress made. Big part of this degree is a discussion by Cyrus about his dream. He dreams, of course, that he sees a lion that's about to devour him. He sees his predecessors that are loaded with chains before the God of the Hebrews. And there's an interpretation of this that inevitably garners his action to release more and more of the funding and people of Israel to make their efforts back and rebuild the temple. This degree, of course, is quite an interesting one in that to me it's very much a hero's journey in some ways. It's a path of going from ignorance and darkness and devastation to grandeur, and then carrying that information back. A little bit of the allegory of the cave is how I look at it. It teaches us to rebuild the Masonic temple of liberty, equality, and fraternity in the nations of the world, the souls of men. And we talk about the great law of ebb and flow in nature. Through our observations, we're going from a city and a nation completely destroyed to one at its peak. So some really interesting comparisons there. This degree, of course, covers pages 311 to page 314. So very short if you're following along in the text. Really some interesting stuff, and let's dive in. Based on the historical, quote-unquote, nature of this degree, we get an interesting injunction right off the bat. This degree, like others in Masonry, is symbolical. Based upon historical truth and authentic tradition, it is still an allegory. The leading lesson of this degree is fidelity to obligations, constancy, and perseverance under difficulties and discouragement. We kick things off right off the bat, telling us that Masonry is engaged in her crusade against ignorance, intolerance, fanaticism, superstition, uncharitableness, and error. Well, I think we've known that before. Masonry, of course, does not sail with the trade winds upon smooth seas, with a free and steady breeze, fair and welcoming us to harbor, but she meets and must overcome opposing currents, baffling winds, and dead calms. The chief obstacle, of course, to her success is the apathy and the faithlessness of her own selfish children and the supine indifference of the world. We start off on a pretty aggressive tone here in regards to what we're going to see in this degree, and I think it's kind of an interesting place to start with. We're then told that the first lesson which one learns, who engages in any great work of reform or beneficence, is that men are essentially careless, lukewarm, they're indifferent to everything that does not concern their own personal or immediate welfare. It is not to single men and not to excuse me, it is to single men and not united efforts of many that all great works of man struggling toward perfection are owing and find their basis. He who endeavors to serve, to benefit and improve the world, is like a swimmer who struggles against a rapid current in a river lashed into angry waves by the winds. I think that's kind of an interesting way to start this degree, talking about the fact that as Masons, we're engaged in a great crusade. We realize that it's not going to be all easy. It's not going to be a cakewalk. We have to acknowledge that there's a lukewarmness and an apathy amongst others, that as a group we may be slowed from progress at time, and it takes the spark of one individual to push the needle and move it forward, and move the needle forward. Now, Masonry, of course, tells us that we must work by duty, and duty requires of us certain actions. We're told to remember that the only question for us to ask in our service as men and Masons is, what does that duty require? What does duty require? And not what will be the result or the reward if we do our duty. We should work on with the sword in one hand and the trowel in the other. From a more abstract perspective of approaching this degree, we can find some symbolism, some understanding that would perhaps lend this idea of going, if you will, from the base of the mountain up to the divine. And so we talk a little bit in the lecture here about this idea of what Masonry teaches about God. And we're told that Masonry teaches that God is a parental being. He has an interest in the work of his creatures, such as his expressed, of course, by his title Father. It's an interest unknown to all the systems of paganism, untaught by all the theories of philosophy. It's an interest not only in the glorious beings of other spheres, the sons of light, the dwellers in heavenly worlds, but in us, poor, ignorant, and unworthy, that he has pity for the erring, pardon of the guilty, love for the pure, knowledge for the humble, promises of immortal life for those who trust and obey him. Without a belief in him, our life is miserable. The world is dark. The universe is disrobed by its splendors, and the intellectual ties to nature broken. The charm of existence dissolved. The great hope lost. And the mind, like a star struck against the spheres, wanders through an infinite desert in its conception without attraction, tendency, destiny toward its end. Masonry teaches us that of all the events and actions that take place in the universe of the world and the eternal succession of ages, there is not one, even the minutest, which God did not forever foresee, and that all the distinctness of immediate vision, combining all, so that man's existence as an instrument was always there and always known, like all the other forces of nature. It teaches us that the soul of man is formed by him for a purpose, that built up in proportion and fashioned in every part by infinite skills is an emanation from his spirit, in its nature, its necessity, and its design, all being a virtue. He continues to discuss this concept of Masonry and God, ending the lecture of this degree talking about God's works being good. And we know that God is good and what he does is right in its purposes. And we're told that if we have faith in him, if we labor and we follow our duties, the darkness around us, the darkness of error, the clouds of ignorance, all those things that stand in our way, all the things that block us from deeper understanding will dissipate. The clouds will be lifted up, the gate of mystery pulled back, and the full light shine forever, the light of which the lodge is a symbol. We must pass through the darkness to reach the light. And that's the ending line of this degree, the final sentence. We must pass the darkness to reach the light. This is a fantastic degree. There's some profound symbolism built into it. I'd encourage you to discuss that with learned brothers. Consider and weigh the meaning of the journey, the differences in the symbolism of the rooms, things like that. You'll find some just fantastic symbolism. My brothers, thank you for joining us as we dig through the 15th degree. I told you this was a short one. Next up will be the 16th degree, Prince of Jerusalem. So catch that one on the channel next time you get a chance. Have a good evening, good night, good afternoon, or good morning.